More doesn't automatically equal better, and that's something that a lot of people need to learn about storytelling. That might sound weird coming from a guy who likes 2003 over Brotherhood, but it's true. It's not a simple thing knowing when to add and when to dial it back in a story to try to make it better. It's not a black and white process of adding more setup to something. It really depends on how you do it. But Cyberpunk Edgerunners strikes that balance perfectly. Even among the greats that have come out in recent memory, Cyberpunk stands in a tier of its own, delivering on intense, fast-paced action that makes sure to keep the audience engaged without sacrificing the heart and soul of what makes a story great. Out of anything you'd expect from Studio Trigger, a precautionary tale about the deteriorating mental state and psychology of a person is probably the last thing that comes to mind. But man, do they do that well. I think a very common criticism that people may have with the show is that things happen too quickly, or there's too much happening in each episode to really grow an attachment to some of the events that take place. I would argue though that not only does it feel that way intentionally, but it's also highly effective at making you empathize with these characters and scenarios. The biggest surprise with this show is that while certain details about the characters' lives and relationships with one another are exposited through dialogue, most of the emotions are conveyed through excellent choices in direction and camera work. Take this part of the first episode, for example, a scene of David strolling through town, going about his morning normally, accompanied by this relaxing feel thanks to the catchy song choice. Now fast forward to the point where David does this again after his mom dies. Nothing about these shots change. Well, almost nothing. There are two major differences: how David acts and the lack of music. That feeling of normalcy isn't there anymore, and this is an incredibly impactful and relatable way to convey how David is feeling in this moment. I think we've all been in a situation like this before, where something bad has happened and it just gets to you, to the point where getting up in the morning, doing the things that you always do, just doesn't feel worth it. The point of this scene doesn't just make you feel sorry for the main character, it puts you directly in his shoes and perfectly conveys not only sadness, but also how unmotivated and lethargic he is. A scene from the first episode that I think a lot of people will misunderstand the purpose of is the mom's death scene. If after watching this first episode you thought to yourself, I didn't feel anything from that because they didn't take enough time for me to get attached to that character, you missed the point. The abruptness of her death and the lack of a proper farewell to her is what makes that sequence so powerful and refreshing. It's cold, it's lonely, and it's really fucked up how little this world cared about her. Her life was measured in numbers all the way to the end. That feeling of cruelty, that sudden jump from she's gonna be okay to she's fucked, time to pay for her funeral, is a simple and small process in the grand scheme of things. And look at how her ashes are delivered to her son. What the fuck? The scenes that follow of David just walking back home, urn in hand, being overloaded with so much information and bombarded with problem after problem is also incredible. It's a personal, tactile scene that hits so close to home for me. These distractions that keep you from properly tending to your responsibilities, how every aspect of your life turns into something you need to worry about the second one thing goes wrong, how even the most basic annoyances like entering your apartment can become this draining source of stress. It's so good at making you understand this character's problems and making him seem alive, and the way that he reacts to these problems, getting surgery and beating the shit out of the school bully, ignoring the messages from his teachers, dropping out of school, and overall just feeling dead on the inside. Seriously, he looks so empty, like he has no solid clue what to do with his life now. And this isn't even the most tragic part of it all. The most devastating part of this story is the never-ending rabbit hole that the main character finds himself in. It may seem like the protagonist is happier than ever at this point in the story, and in a lot of ways, his life is better than ever. He finally finds people who accept him, a place where he can fit in, and he gets laid too. And yeah, but there's something tragic about the way David gets more invested in all of this, the way he shuts out people trying to give him second chances, more responsible ways of living, and ignores all of his problems. That scene of him just messing around in space, it feels liberating, it's fun and exhilarating, and it puts into perspective why it's so easy to slip into bad habits. Everything about how this show frames David's state of mind is it's just so good. You have a perfectly clear understanding of why David makes the choices he does. That feeling of being special and the way the show weaves in the desire for that feeling into the main character's personality reminds me of an addiction. This darker aspect of David's life becomes much more apparent in the second half of the show. He becomes obsessed with optimizing himself and replacing his organic body parts. It gets to a point where he says he feels better in metal than in his own skin. He starts ignoring the advice of other people who legitimately want to help him. That sense of tension that comes from the fact that David's mind is slowly being warped by the the alterations made to his body not only makes for gripping drama, but it also says something meaningful about a dark subject matter, lashing out at people, feeling your grasp of reality slipping, and the crushing loneliness that comes from feeling that no one can truly understand and save you. None of these ideas are explicitly stated in the show's dialogue, but you can sense it from the framing, the existential horror of the imagery, and the amazing direction. It ends tragically with the main character's death, and you feel sorry for this kid. He's someone who kept being guided in the wrong direction and made one bad decision after the other, and he goes past the point of no return without even realizing it. And all of this was just me talking about one specific person and the general direction of his narrative. I haven't even discussed the wide supporting cast of memorable, likable characters, though, to be fair, I don't have much to say about them. Don't get me wrong, they're good characters, they're really good characters, especially with how the show uses them, but the most interesting thing about them is how they develop and affect the protagonist, and they fill their supporting role wonderfully, Lucy and Maine particularly. This show makes me optimistic for the future of anime. It tells me that this medium isn't doomed to be a bunch of copies of each other and various tropes. Every aspect of the show was fresh and innovative down to the letter, and that's the reason why I think it's the best anime to come out in a long time. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a show with a lot to say, but the raw and visceral subjects and themes feel like they're being lost on the people watching. Everybody has taken note of the visuals for this anime, the animation, character designs, art direction, aesthetic in general, but the reason why I haven't talked about any of those elements here is because those are only the cherry on top, a really big cherry that distracts people from the bigger and more delicious cake underneath. Thanks for watching, hope you liked it, and I'll be going now.